Okay, let us get started. Welcome, everybody. You've been given the very serious "we are being recorded" warning. That means that, well, I'm not sure what that means. It means you should duck out if you didn't want to be recorded or seen or heard, I guess. Anyhow, this is going to be a conversation I'm really looking forward to. So much so that I have had a post-COVID shave for the occasion, and I've also actually written an introduction. So forgive me if I glance away every so often. I sort of look at my notes and make sure I say what I want to say in the right order. Those of you who've been to many of these talks of mine know that I far prefer to talk off the cuff and make things up as I go along. But on this occasion, I thought in Olgierd's honor, I would actually be organized. So let's talk a little bit about what today's conversation is going to be about, and also why I've chosen this topic and why I think it's significant. Okay, so there has been a tradition in the field of linguistics for pretty much a century now that says that the purpose of linguistics is to study spoken language rather than written language. And along with that goes the notion that written language exists only as a means of visibly conveying the sounds of speech. Interestingly, anthropologists see things quite differently. They are much more likely to see writing as a cultural practice or a cultural product, and to be really interested in a variety of aspects of writing that place it in its context. So because linguists are primarily interested in speech, this means that when they do pay attention to writing, what they pay attention to is primarily the kinds of writing that mirror speech. In other words, phonetic writing. You might want to mute yourselves. I'm getting a little background noise coming in. Thanks. So if you only study phonetic writing, then you ignore two really huge important areas, both of which we explore a lot. One of those areas is that it ignores phonetic writing that does more than convey the sounds of speech. And I've talked about this a great deal on YouTube. The elements of writing that are in fact visual or graphic and have impact in addition to being phonetic. But the other area that gets ignored is the area of writing that involves non-phonetic symbols, written or graphic forms that convey intent or content or meaning, but are dismissed as simply not writing, and in fact are often referred to as being inferior or primitive even. And there isn't even a word, a generally used or generally agreed word for these kinds of meaning symbols. Some people talk in terms of graphic writing, some people talk in terms of non-phonetic writing. And there's a term that our guest today is going to talk about, which is grapholinguistics. But my laptop doesn't even recognize the word grapholinguistics. And so clearly it hasn't made its way into the Apple vocabulary, at least. So what I want to do today is to introduce you to my friend Olgierd from Warsaw, who's a sinologist, but is also an expert in signs and symbols that have meaning. So first of all, I'm just going to call on him. Olgierd, come and join us and say hello and welcome.
Hello, everybody. Really nice to see all of you coming here from all over the place. And actually, maybe, Tim, you recognize one of the people here. It's Alexandra. He's also a member of Sign and Symbol Research Group.
Wonderful.
That you already visited a couple of times.
Yes.
So, yeah.
You know what? That would be a great place to start. Why don't you tell people a little bit about the Sign and Symbol Research Group and what you're doing? Because this, in my experience, is pretty unusual.
Well, it's a group of people that started meeting around Mayan language research. I started attending a class on writing systems because that was always my fascination in my life. And then suddenly we decided to organize a PhD seminar, and then it kind of evolved into the research group that concerns itself with all things that are about really widely defined and wildly defined writing. Because one of the first questions that our Professor Mikulska asked, and I really love that question because you also like it, is what is writing?
Yep.
What is writing? We have this kind of Saussurean definition, which is not really Saussurean, that writing simply writes down language. It's so not true that I won't even mention that, because it's not. And in many, many writing systems, it's way beyond that. And one of the most brilliant examples is in one of our seminars, Alexandra that is here. All right, I will call her Kuka. Everybody calls her Kuka. So Kuka gave us that in Japanese, you can write one character, especially I didn't know about that, but you can write one character and read it in a couple of very different ways, especially if it's a name. I realized they have different readings for a character, but I never realized how wild it is in the names. And all of a sudden the system becomes weird. But then when we're looking into our own system, the alphabetic system, come on, alphabet is not purely phonetic system at all. You just have to look carefully and notice the things that are happening with the way we put it on paper, with the way the punctuation works, the way we use emoticons and emojis, which are different, is not the same. Emojis are not emoticons, not always. Most of the time they're not. And all the things that we convey with letters, which are not phonetic, just think how the acronyms work and how we use them. And suddenly the purely phonetic system becomes way more complicated.
Okay, great. So let's pick up from there. So you've already given us 2 or 3 ways in which, even in what seems to be an alphabetic and phonetic system, writing actually is conveying other kinds of information, to use it in the computer terminology. Would you like to introduce us to some of the images that you've prepared for today, so that we can see some other examples that are going to sort of elasticize this notion of writing?
Well, let's start with some things imagined. It's not exactly the first picture, but since I see some people I know, especially the guys from Endangered Alphabets, I hope you guys enjoy it. I see Anson, I see Jan Kuchera, I see, of course, the Julian, the Alec, the smart Alec of the group. Okay, let's take a look at this. Those things are the imagined alphabets. If you can see, by the way, you can see the right one, I hope. It's the one with the, yeah, I hope it, yeah, I give one. Please, another thing that I would like you to do is to actually unmute yourself and talk if you really feel like it. Not at every time, but if you really feel like it, let's make it more of a conversation. What do you see here? Do you recognize any of those?
Okay, Lord of the Rings, I guess.
Yeah.
Yes, Kasper, can you repeat it?
Lord of the Rings, I guess.
Lord of the Rings. So we've got 2 imagined alphabets by Tolkien. I hope you recognize which ones of those are. Then what else? Anybody else that recognizes anything interesting? Tim, do you recognize anything you like here?
There's either semaphore or it's the characters from the Case of the Dancing Men by
Of course, it's your favorite dancing man case. I wanted you to talk about it a bit.
Actually, I'll talk about this very briefly. When I was first working on the first exhibition of Endangered Alphabets carvings, I was carving Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in Samaritan. And while I was carving it, I kept on thinking the Case of the I kept on thinking Sherlock Holmes, and I couldn't figure out why this was coming to my mind. And then I realized it was the semaphore characters from the Case of the Dancing Men. And the reason I was thinking about it is that in Samaritan, the bottoms of the letters are not level, they're not horizontal. And there is something extraordinarily provocative about a writing system that doesn't abide by the horizontal line. And obviously, if it's a vertical script, then that it doesn't abide in one way, but just the fact that the bottoms of the letters were not set up in this architectural fashion, it's one of the things that indicates how little Samaritan has changed over the past 2,000 years, and how resolutely it refuses to conform to one of the fundamental elements that we think of as writing, namely, the obedience to the horizontal line. Okay, back to you, Olesh.
Well, if you, yeah, exactly. That's what I wanted to hear, because I know you like those.
Yes.
Little man. But then I've got something for other people as well. Anson, do you recognize the figure on the left, top left? What the hell is that?
It's from Arrival.
It's from Arrival. What is that?
It's like the heptapod. Well, you can see time in a linear way or something, right? Or not linear,
yes,
in a circular way.
In a circular way. It's kind of a writing that also includes the whole reading of the reality. It's much wider. It's like the definition of ideogram, where the idea is the actual world of the person, the actual life cycle of the person, which is really interesting. And the interesting thing of all here is the way it works, because this kind of when we think about science fiction, one of the interesting things is you suddenly see things after you come back to the reality that we are in, that actually, well, writing goes well beyond what we think writing is. And as we know, because we cooperated with Anson on Endangered Alphabets, it's our discussions, what actually is writing. It's when I think about heptapods, what comes to mind, we've got those catecismos, which are constructed in, I believe it is in Peru, which are constructed as three-dimensional structures that are supposed to describe a story from Bible, or kind of thing that we want to teach children. So, and it's three-dimensional, it's made with figurines, but is it writing or not?
And I love your idea that you can have a symbol that encompasses an entire worldview. So it becomes almost like an ideogram. What's the word?
Soyombo. That's what you
hologram.
think.
That's the word I'm looking for. An ideogram, okay. Hologram.
Now take a look at this. What is that?
That's the Soyombo.
That's the Soyombo. Do you remember what it means?
There's the moon, the sun, flame.
Yeah, but the whole character is actually a whole character. What does it mean?
I know there's the arrows pointing to the ground, but yeah, I don't know what the whole thing means.
Well, the whole thing means the opening, the starting.
It means the what?
The opening, the starting of whatever it is. This one is Mongolian flag. It's symbolically, it means exactly that thing, the starting of a thing. It's the idea in quite a few alphabets connected with kind of Buddhist roots, you'll find a character, and Tim knows about it, the opening character and the closing character.
Right.
Right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
is it a writing or is it not a writing?
Is it a form of punctuation or is it a form of signposting?
But then if you, and that makes you think about what we know, and what the hell do we say when we say alpha and omega? You see, in our culture, we also have that much more complicated view, because you've got the graphic symbol, you've got alpha, omega, but then again, it's not only the phoneme that it describes. It encompasses a lot of meanings. That's what I wanted to say when I was talking about acronyms. Those alphabets work in different ways depending on the context and depending on what you actually communicate, on what you want to read. It's much more complicated than just phonetic. It really depends on many other things. And alpha and omega, sometimes, some moment it just dawned on me that it's, well, that's alpha, that's the Uziemblo symbol, but alpha has also the phonetic meaning, the Uziemblo symbol. Not really, it's just the opening. You open the story, you open the narrative with that.
And then you have in the Mandaic alphabet, you have the character which is both the beginning and the end. So essentially it makes the entire alphabet circular. It means that it doesn't ever end. It continues.
I believe in Uziemblo, you just have to switch switch some symbols within that symbol to make it the closing one.
Got it. And I think Javanese has a very similar set of symbols as well.
Yeah, so suddenly, and then you start thinking about punctuation, and usually we skip it when we talk about writing, because we show the alphabetic characters or abugida characters. By the way, abugida alphabet is another term that it's a bit fishy, because those are historic terms. They don't really, because we kind of have a notion of phoneticism so much ingrained in our brain that we think that a single letter corresponds to one phoneme. Not really. It seems like the alphabet, the longer the alphabet lives, the more a couple of characters are evolving towards some kind of ideographic meaning. If you look about things like
so yeah, these are all great examples. Can we have a look at your next set?
Oh, which one? The flags?
Yeah, why not?
Or the set of the alphabets? Because I wanted to.
Oh, yeah, do the set of the alphabets. Yeah, let's do that.
Can
one.
you see it now?
Yeah.
Well, this actually does the bone I always want to pick with you is, why did you call it alphabets? It's such a culturally localized name, you know. It's one of the things that but okay, what do we have here? We have different writing systems, right? And those writing systems are usually called some very particular names. I hope you guys recognize at least some of them. You can say which one is hieroglyph and hieroglyph. And this is in some linguistic traditions, hieroglyphs will be only the Egyptian writing. And that's how it should be, because those are the sacred writings. Although you have got other writings that are particularly sacred. We always forget about the thing that some writing systems are not all encompassing verbal writing systems as alphabets are, for example, mostly, but they are particular to certain area of our life, like hieroglyphs. Some writing can only be taken in, for example, sacral context.
Right.
And that's another question for us in endangered alphabets. Are we, in order to save that writing, allowed to change the context? I think we should leave it to the users. It's what is happening with Dongba writing. That's on another slide. Let me take a look. Where was it? I believe it is
So just for those of you who don't know, okay, no, you're good.
It's on the top right corner. Dongba writing is writing of some very small people, like 300,000 people in northern Yunnan. It's in China, it's in the mountains. And that writing is recognized by UNESCO, which is a good step because it's going to be preserved. But on the other hand, the revival attempts seem to be failing. Why? Because most of the time that writing was in a sacred context of the local shaman life. And now it is forced to come out. It's used in local science, and it doesn't live this way. The local people do not write with it. They don't really want, because they still associate it with the sacredness of Tomba, local shamans. And the question is, because Chinese government wants to have it, revitalized, at the same time, doesn't really look into how to do it in a way that local people would recognize it as valid. That's one of the most important people we need to do in endangered alphabets. We need to cross the line, go with the local people and ask them what they want to do. And maybe it will be helpful, maybe not, right?
So just to expand on what Olgierd just said, yes, so these signs are showing up in Starbucks and McDonald's and sort of signage, where there is this kind of bastardization that creates a kind of a rebus out of a series of Dongba symbols, which obviously is about as far, both linguistically and spiritually, as you could possibly get from the original meaning of the characters.
Yes, because sometimes some kinds of writing, the same thing happens with Rongo Rongo, which is the still unread writing of the Easter Island, which is used like kind of a tourist bait in signage, even though it is not read or even used at all. And then it's an interesting part, because that writing is, as I wanted to start with this beautiful slide. Where is it? Yeah, here. Yeah. Reading and writing cannot be separated. Now, is that true? Because
Great question. Jump it. Think about that for a second and jump in, everybody.
Yeah.
I think it can be separated. I mean, I vaguely remember that there were some kinds of communication without any kind of writing down. So it still exists without writing it down. It does not persist.
Well, there is reading, and you've got reading, but can you have reading without writing? Yes. You've got a lot of writing that happens in a way that it's not really written. You can read somebody's mood. You can read the forest. You can read what animals left in the forest. It's called reading. You can read palms, and it's the writing, not really. But then again, you've got writing that you cannot read. You've got a lot of writing that is done, for example, in is it like angelic writings that they were very popular in 19th century. Then people were spontaneously doing some kind of writing, and they would say what they wrote, but nobody else could have read it. You've got asemic writing is an art form now. When people are writing down things on a piece of paper, and well, it's asemic, so it does not bear much meaning in it.
I would also suggest that when in a sentence like this, or I guess it's two sentences, the implication is that both reading and writing are really narrowly defined. And it implies that reading is sort of sequential and left to right or right to left, or if you're in Mongolia, maybe vertically. And one of the things that I find fascinating about a number of these grapholinguistic traditions that you're interested in is that you can take them in multi-dimensional ways. You don't have to start in one place and then end up in another place in order for them to make sense, any more than if you look at somebody's face, you have to start somewhere and go somewhere else in order to be able to read their expression. I think that while this looks sort of true superficially, it's actually really, really kind of limiting.
I'm sorry, I guess we have to wait because it means low battery. Please connect the.
Someone says low batteries. Yeah.
Uh-oh, someone needs to get plugged in. Olesh, is that you? Probably.
Yeah, whoever's sharing the screen.
Well, given that it's telling him in Polish, I doubt that it's Alec or me.
Can I make a comment here? This is all about semiotics or semiology, images, it signs, all this. And that's a whole separate study in linguistics, a very specific field. But this reading and writing, what's really interesting is that if we look at the history of writing, think about the monks that were writing, doing copies of the Bible. They were the only ones writing anything, but they were writing it so a few people could read, right? And the only people who could read were the people that are able to read, which is the elite. So there was a certain period of time in, and that's one example in history where the people that were able to read were a little bit more than those who were able to write, but those who were able to write were very, very specified. Now what's happened in history now is we've come to a point where we're pushing for education, to be democratic for everyone, but that's not always been the case in history. So these are things to think about, and as we brought this up a little bit earlier with all the different kinds of aspects of localization and cultures and things. And I've been really thinking is that the writing is really a transfer of knowledge for future, right? Everything we do in a daily life is speaking, but everything we've been doing writing from what I've been in three decades, it's about communicating to the future generations when we're not here anymore to be able to talk and explain it as storytellers. And are there any cases that we know of where writing is not used as a way to communicate to the next generations, a thing that it has been used as always for daily communication, or have we made writing something that it more than it is in regular life for all kinds of cultures? Just some thoughts. So.
Yeah, I got some answers there. Olesh, why don't you jump in if you're still there? I'm not sure if we still actually have Olesh with us.
I don't think he's here because if his battery was low and he's not showing, he was sharing his video, I think he's not here.
Let's assume he's going to rejoin us. Yeah, so the relationship, this is sort of an area that I hadn't even thought we were going to go into, but it's a really interesting area. The relationship between the writer and the reader is one that absolutely develops over time. So if your purpose of writing is simply, for example, to mark something as a possession, then you're only really writing for yourself. Consequently, what you need to do—
I'm sorry.
You're back.
I have a computer problem. Yeah,
that's all right. So yeah, if you are writing primarily to place a symbol on something, for example, if you are, we're looking at Egyptian tombs and you're sort of putting your name on the wall of the tomb as a way of sort of establishing that you are an important person. It doesn't matter whether what you write is particularly legible or has that kind of infrastructure of legibility, such as, spaces and punctuation and whatnot. The more you get the development of the reader, the more you need to actually create a kind of a writing infrastructure that readers can can use to make sense of what it is you put down. Then equally, there are plenty of types of writing, and I'm thinking of hermetic writing, for example, where you actually don't want people to be able to read it because what you are noting is something that is so important that you know that if it falls into the wrong hands, it could mean the destruction of the universe.
And I don't know what were you exactly talking about. I'm sorry.
No worries.
Sorry for the computer problem. But first, you have to rehost me.
Okay, will do.
And second,
maybe I can say what my question was. So I said this is all about semiotics and semiology and signs and stuff. And I said in the history of man, most of the things that we've seen in writing is to transfer knowledge or to do things in, like we talk about sacred things, but it's not, it doesn't always daily life things, it just always happens, in storytelling or communication verbally, it's always oral. But a lot of things in writing is to communicate and to diffuse further beyond the local family and local village or to future generations. And so I was asking, do we have any cases where it's not that, it's not this need to disseminate, diffuse, or provide transfer knowledge to the next generations when someone's there to tell the story anymore verbally? That's kind of instigated this answer that Tim's giving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like with Domba writing. It's one of the problems is that it's not exactly writing in our understanding. There are some parts you need to know the story already in order to be able to read it. If you do not know the story already, you don't really know the parts that are missing. So you read a part of it. And it's not really a mnemotechnique. People get mad when I say something like that. It's not. It's partially written, partially not, because all the Bon, which is the kind of Buddhist shamanic religion that is in those regions, it's a very secretive religion, and I don't know whether we even should force ourselves upon the local people. Read it to us. Like Joseph Rock, when he was doing the research in 1920s and 1930s, he tried to do it. And now we learn that some of the things that he's been told are not really truth. So he's been lied to, like Margaret Mead.
So this is a fabulous opportunity. I want to introduce just, I'm going to do a little bit of screen sharing and introduce just one image from my desktop here. Whoops, it's hang on just one second. So just the other day, I was doing some traveling around and was pausing off at an airport, and I was reading a paper about Vanuatu sand drawings. And we'll come back to that as soon as I can figure out how to share my screen. And okay, so here we go. We're screen sharing. Okay, if I'm screen sharing, how come we can't see it? All right. Can you see that drawing?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, great. So this is a fabulous example of a kind of a multi-dimensional communication that sort of includes what you might call writing, but actually includes all these other dimensions as well. So it begins with a series of points that are mapped out in the sand, and then the storyteller draws a line without ever taking his finger out of the sand that goes over all of these points and never duplicates itself and makes this extraordinarily complex pattern while telling a story, which is that literally the twists and turns of the story are illustrated in the twists and turns of the finger in the sand. But the thing that I found most interesting about this was that apparently it is, although it's a means of passing on proverbial wisdom or telling stories or giving personal histories, all this kind of thing, it has this other dimension, which is that it's also intended to conceal information. So the different islands in Vanuatu have different stories, although they overlap a lot, but the same basic shape, like the sea turtle here, can actually be used for different stories. But there's one that this paper mentioned, which I thought was brilliant, where the story is about an outsider who comes to a local chief and asks about a particular piece of local law or wisdom. And the chief does not want to reveal this, but equally does not want to be rude to the outsider. And so as the storyteller tells the story, you see the finger going through the sand, going off on all of these directions, like way away from the center of the diagram. And this is the chief who is sending the outsider to all of these places saying, oh, if you want to find this information, you need to go and talk to so-and-so, or you need to go over here. And this pattern goes on, and the outsider sort of completes a loop of the pattern and comes back again to the chief. And the chief says, oh, did I say so-and-so? No, I meant so-and-so. And the pattern then goes off in a different direction. And when the story is finished, at the heart of the pattern is a kind of a diamond shape of untouched sand, which is the piece of wisdom the outsider wanted to know, and the chief didn't want him to know. And the boundary, the diamond shape has been formed by the finger, which represented the outsider walking right past that piece of knowledge without recognizing it was there. So what I love about this in terms of extensions of writing is that it involves static visual images, both the dots at the beginning and the finished image at the end. It involves moving visual images with the line and the finger. It involves multiple, literally physical layers. As you can see here, that many of the lines go over the same line, and cross over it. It involves an oral narrative and storytelling, and each one is like a part of the overall event, which is a performance. So our notions of writing really don't encompass either these visual elements or the performative element that this embodies. And yet, this is exactly the kind of thing that would have been seen as primitive or kind of less than writing because it was non-phonetic, or it is non-phonetic.
Well, yeah, the notion that writing evolves. I know, Alec. Don't get upset. There is a progress. Evolution is change. So writing changes, and actually, I would say that most of the writing system kind of go into an equilibrium state, where they want to, usually writing kind of starts spreading along the social structure, filling in more and more niches that maybe it is useful for if the society is big enough. But then actually, if you look at our writing, well, that's the one I started talking about. Even though it supposedly represents phonemes, it goes into an ideographic phase in a way. Parts of our words, because there are so many words I know, spelled in a very similar way, too. If you have TWO, you've got two, right? You got TOO or TOO, then you've got two. And then you've got two somewhere, also spelled in a different way. The moment you see it, you understand it, even though it is pronounced in a different way. Therefore, your reading acts different from what you say. There is a context. Here you've got letters. It's a bit different. It's different items that are different semiotically meaningful parts that are represented, not exactly the same. I even did this, which is kind of another way of looking at writing. You can actually name writing or typologize writing by the way they look. And then iconic, as it is understood scientifically, is the ones that are the most picturesque. Looks like pictures. But now I'm talking only about the way they look. You've got really abstract symbols, really abstract. Then you've got less abstract. Sometimes there are many symbols interrelated, so they're iconic within the systems, like in Chinese. And then some things which are iconic for everybody. So you can actually see a horse, a painting of the horse, or a bird, like in Egyptian writing. But what do they encode? Sometimes they encode a phoneme, maybe more, maybe even much more. And sometimes they can encode the whole discourse segments, like Vanuatu would be abstract pattern decoding the whole story.
And in CBD, you get exactly the same thing, where you have these symbols that can build up to make entire narratives, even though they are not phonemic at all.
Yeah, and the way we write, I mean, the way it functions, again, we can split into letters, like I understand Samaritan is still splitting things into letters, right?
Yep.
But then you've got Mongolian, which is so well interconnected.
Yeah, this is really interesting. Would you like me to pull up the slide of mine that you like at this point?
Actually, I stole it from you.
Go ahead.
Wait, where is it? I had it. I swear I had it. Okay, you pulled it out.
I saw it in there. Yeah.
It's somewhere there. Wait. I got some problems with the computer. Yeah, where is it?
I've got it if you can't find it.
Okay, I'll unshare now. You share yours.
All right, let me just go back to my screen here and okay, I'm going back to sharing, everybody. Not that. Sorry for the delay here. If I were technologically swifter, I could actually do this.
Wait a moment, I found mine.
Too late, I found mine.
Okay, yeah, that's the one.
Okay, so yeah, tell people what you like about this slide of mine.
Well, what I like about the slide of yours, it's the line in the middle, because we've got real continuum of what is the role of script. Like we've got local, culture, graphic, familiar, idiosyncratic for personal use, scriptural, body-centric. Some writing is really body-oriented. And then you've got those universal writing systems, right? And the same writing system may act both ways. For me, writing is really continuum. There are certain cultures which only part of it, what we see on the screen is used. Just as I said before, the one that which are only in sacrum. The ones that are, for example, there will be cultures where writing will be only numbers because that's what they need. It's some of the theories of the start of the writing. I've got many theories, right? Would say that writing was basically an accounting system first. The other ones would say that writing is developed from Holy Scripture, from the gods. And then you've got a lot of local stories. Why we disregard them? There's a lot of local understanding of what the writing is for the local people. And some of them is given by God, some of them is invented by brave men. And sometimes, as you always like to point out, writing gets lost somewhere. We had writing, but we don't have it now.
Right.
So writing has a really important meaning in many cultures. And the thing I have a problem with, that we attach meaning to our alphabetic, that's why I had a problem with that term, alphabet, to our alphabetic writing. Because we see it as the pinnacle of the human evolution and development. It's not.
Yep, totally agreed. So I'm going to introduce a visual aid here. So here, what we have is, many of you know this already. So this is one of the Adinkra symbols. This is Bidinka, which is a stylized version of two fish eating each other's tails. And like many of the Adinkra symbols, it has a proverbial meaning, which is that if we are going to live together in a community or as a society, we shouldn't be, I guess we would say backbiting. You know, we shouldn't be attacking each other out of envy or out of jealousy. And there are several things that I want to point out about this. One is that because it doesn't attempt to be really, really realistic in terms of two fish, it means that it's much easier to draw. You know, one of the things about writing is that ideally anybody who needs to practice it should be able to practice it. And so therefore having a stylized or simplified fish makes everything much more amenable. Secondly, it also means that it's much easier to print, because the Adinkra symbols, after all, were originally essentially woodcuts that were used in fabric printing. Third thing is that this doesn't mean that this is an unsophisticated symbol. Like many of the Adinkra symbols, it does these really fascinating things with symmetry. So this is actually asymmetrical. Many of these symbols are just beautiful because they've been in the hands of people who are using them for visual purposes. And so they have been, they've maintained certain kind of integral features while nevertheless being sort of developed to, in many cases, a position of great beauty. And the final thing I want to point out is that this, unlike spoken language, this is not restricted to a particular language culture. This is something like a European road sign where people can understand it because of its graphic content. And so in that sense, it's starting to make alphabetic and phonetic writing systems seem much more local and limited in their application, especially in an area where you have many different spoken languages within a relatively few square miles.
Yeah, talking about the sign languages, we always forget that we've already have a lot of sign languages functioning in our vicinity, and sometimes they even have dialects. My one of the favorite examples is the toilet sign.
Go on.
Right? You see it. It's obvious. Then you go to Poland and you get stumped every time you go to a toilet. Because ladies' room in Poland is marked by a circle. And the man's room is marked by a triangle. So
where did that come from?
Oh, that's a long story. The circle, I'm sure where it comes from. The triangle, I'm not sure. The circle reportedly comes because traditionally in nobility houses, when there was a lady ready to be married in the house, the landowner would put a wheel on, marking that they're seeking the man. So that was the marking of a lady. I suppose I'm still trying to check that story against other reports, but that's the one that I encountered. Still, it's a bit weird. But going back to that, there is a lot of symbols that are supposed to be international. Like there is a stairway, the signs, which are the arrows that are leading us places. Those are signs. Those are writing. We don't see it, but we use it in our writing. Like well, like in here, I just used it, right? There is an arrow right here, right? And actually, I'm wrong because I put it in one way. It should be arrow both ways. But then again, there is another thing that we always disregard is this. We kind of try to see an image as separate from writing. That one is from the Nightwinger or Nightwing comic book. As kind of as Spider-Man, I guess, somewhere I took it from it. But look at it, that's image together with writing. And well, image is semiotically valid, yes, but it's within writing, and one completes another. It wouldn't act that well without another.
Right. Going back to a point you made,
Tim, can I make a comment on your thing you said you're carving here? The carving that you showed, it's really interesting that company logos, think about this, company logos, Nike, Adidas, Twitter, so I'm sorry to mention Twitter right now, but all these logos, and I've seen, it's Oscars that you were the one that wanted to have comments on your new logo for your company or something. I think you were the ones asking for that, right? I think you made asking for it. All these company logos you try to find a simplified version with certain traits to make it really simple, so it can be easy to print, it can be easy to view, it can be easy to memorize, and this follows all the things we're talking about, right?
Yes, precisely so. Yeah, exactly. And some of them are so much ingrained now that you'll recognize the swoosh immediately, and you can actually encode a word with that, or whatever. And think about the emojis, which are actually, I teach a class on Chinese vulgarisms, and we discuss all the world vulgar tongue. And there is the whole set of emojis which is used in swearing. They've got an eggplant, but they're not saying what does it mean. You're recording that, and we're not in my classroom. You've got cherries, you've got peach, you've got little cat. Guess what that means?
Actually, before we've got just a few minutes left, and I do want to throw this open for questions, but I want to ask one last thing that I'm really interested in, which has to do with other forms of notation, such as musical notation and mathematical notation. I personally would love to see, PET scan, brain scans, which show whether letters as we, yes, I saw that, letters as we understand them, and music and mathematical notation, whether they actually fire the same neurons or whether they fire different neurons, because we do certain things with letters that we don't do with mathematical notation or musical notation. And your graphic is a great one because it really illustrates how strict most new musical notation is, so that as soon as you start messing with it, you may actually be trying to get a perfectly interesting musical output, but it looks weird to us because we're used to it being so formulaic.
You see the one on the bottom middle?
Oh, yeah.
That's one of the famous Polish composers, Penderecki's score. And his scores are famous for being colored. This one is not, but they're famous for being colored as well as all other things. And those are famously complicated. That's modern music with a lot of assonance and things that I don't really understand. Alec would understand, I guess.
Actually, this gives me a great chance to do the final point that I wanted to make, which is to, that as a sort of wrap up. If you go back to the early 20th century, then definitions of music would draw very clear distinctions between familiar and unfamiliar instrumentation, familiar and unfamiliar scales, and also music that was created by non-instrumental purposes, such as sound effects. And of course, famously in the rock and roll era, people were saying that isn't music, that's just noise. And when you listen to the music that Patricia composed for our Zooms and for the endangered alphabets, I said to her, I wanted something that had kind of an island feel to it. And I also like the idea of having Indonesian gamelan music or something reminiscent of that. And so she's produced this wonderful piece of music that contains non-Western scales and non-Western instrumentation and sound effects and waves in the background. And today, we wouldn't hesitate to call that music. What we're talking about in today's talk is that writing has not yet become as inclusive a term, because there is so much that is being excluded from the term writing. And there may come a day when the term writing is as elastic and as embracing as the term music, but we haven't got there yet. Okay, we have a few minutes left for questions. Please bung us your questions. Olgierd, can you stop screen sharing so we can see
yeah, sure.
people who are asking questions or making comments or whatever? And Alec, can you please keep recording? We had so many people asking why the recording last time ended before we got into the question session, which was my fault. I'd like to record the question and answer session as well. So everybody, please dive in.
The frustrating things about questioning, writing, and speaking is that once you spend 1 hour questioning it, it looks like you got all the way back, because suddenly you have more questions than you had at the beginning.
That's why our research group still keeps working.
Yes.
Out of self-interest, simple questions like the alien character, right?
Yeah. Actually, this year we're concentrating on the way symmetry works in the visual communication, which is really interesting. Yeah, and you just mentioned symmetry, so it may be just in your, in your garden.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that struck me when I first started carving was how the Roman alphabet from statuary, not the Roman alphabet as it was used by, in everyday people, is so invested in symmetry, and that gives the impression of stability. This is a military empire that makes its military leaders gods, and so the imperial virtues are virtues of permanence and stability and strength, and the letters represent those, and we've taken them over in the same way that we've taken over, for example, columns as a means of representing reverence and stability and durability and strength. So, and if you look at many of the endangered alphabets or scripts, should we say, some of them are not interested in symmetry at all, nothing whatsoever. Other questions?
I was thinking that if writing is equal with breathing, the poor James Joyce had a hard time writing the Ulysses, right?
Yes, he would have died of hypoxia a long time ago. Okay, well, we are pretty much out of time, and I want to do one last announcement, which is that if you would like to continue, if you'd like the endangered alphabets to continue making these, it would be great if you would support us. And there are a couple of ways you can support us, which are very seasonal. So if, for example, you do any shopping on Amazon.com, if instead of going into Amazon.com, you go into smile.amazon.com, they will allow you to, or actually they will ask you to name a charity or nonprofit that will benefit from your purchase. Doesn't cost you anymore. It actually bleeds a little bit of money out of Amazon. Two good reasons. And so you can make your purchase, and Amazon gives us a small piece of the purchase. And the second thing is, if you go to endangeredalphabets.com and click on the shop link, then there are endangered alphabets items which are utterly unique, which you can buy and give people for Christmas or some other holiday tradition. So just those two things. With that, I will say thank you so much to everybody for joining us. And thank you also for doing something which Olgierd invited you to do, which we've never done before, which is actually the running verbal insert commentary as opposed to chat, which I thought worked great. We will make the chat available. We'll also be, obviously we'll make the recording available, and we'll send you the link so you can get that. So I would like.
And we've been Zoom bombed vocally first time. That's nice.
True. So I'd like to thank Olgierd so much for staying up so late at night. I won't say that I hope Poland beat Argentina, but I will say that we wish the Polish people the very best under these trying circumstances.
Well, you know whom I want whom to beat, and it's not in the football field.
Yes, understood. All right, thanks everybody, and stay tuned because I'm hoping to do one of these conversations every month. It'll usually be on a Sunday. It'll usually be around the same time or maybe a little earlier. And we look forward to seeing you again. Thanks. And thank you, Alec, for running the board, as they say in the musical business, and to Patricia for composing the music, which you will hear right now. I hope, if Alec's paying attention. Yes, yes.